the time of the Commonwealth failure, along with the displeasure of God involving the Puritans in the spring of 1692, the Salem witch trials hysteria began in Salem, Massachusetts, with religious, political, and socioeconomic conflicts between two different parts of the town. With 200 people being accused and 19 executed, the triumph of this event was the Puritans following what they believed to be God's orders and eradicating every witch that walked the town of Salem. But the tragedy would be these innocent women and men were either hung or jailed for being accused of witchcraft. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England of any liturgy, ceremony, or practices that weren't found in the scripture. In 1692, the Royal Charter for Massachusetts was granted to Puritan leaders of the New England Company by King Charles I, and that same year, the Puritans received authorization to begin migration. They fled from England due to the persecution of their religious beliefs. In the American colonies, the Puritans were one of the first groups to settle in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They established it as a city on the hill, which would be the model for good behavior and religious purity for the whole world. With John Winthrop, the chief figure among the Puritans, as the governor, and Thomas Dudley, a very influential person who sailed on the same ship as Winthrop on their trip to America as a deputy governor, they tried their hardest to establish a theocratic government with Puritan beliefs. They believed that God formed a covenant with them and expected the Puritans to live according to his scriptures. The Bible was their single authority, and they applied it to their everyday life. Along with that, going to church was mandatory because the religious life and political life were completely intertwined. There would be a town meeting where only male church members were allowed to vote on issues affecting the town, but this devotedness took a turn in the hysteria of the Salem witch trials. In the spring of 1692, when a group of 8 young girls accused of being possessed by the devil came to light, 2 of the girls, Abigail Williams and Betty Paris, claimed to see invisible spirits, along with having terrible fits. When Abigail was examined, the doctor told her she was bewitched. She then began to accuse many other women of witchcraft, like Tituba, who was a slave owned by Reverend Samuel Paris, Sarah Good, a homeless woman that would mutter to herself when she didn't receive charity, and Sarah Osborne, also known as Goody Osborne, who was a kind person and a widow. When the women were accused of witchcraft, it was a trial that you wouldn't expect. Many of the women were incriminated mainly off of testimonies from neighbors and or witch tests. Some of the witch tests included the prayer test, where the person accused had to recite the Lord's Prayer without any mistakes or omissions. Failure to do so resulted in either jail or death by hanging. Witch marks were also used during investigation. They were considered the markings of the devil, and these included moles, scars, birthmarks, and sores. The swimming test: the accused was dragged to the closest body of water, stripped of their clothing, bounded, and then thrown into the water. If the person sank, they were considered innocent, but if the person floated, they were considered a witch. There are many things that tore the town apart along the lines of religious leaders and land. The fight for land was prominent and devious because once you are accused of witchcraft, the state took ownership of all the person's physical property. Many of the people accused and hung were landowners of arable land. The women that were accused were widows without a clear sole heir of their property. For example, when John Proctor, a successful businessman that owned a local pub and large sums of land, and his wife, Elizabeth Proctor, were accused of witchcraft and jailed, the land was seized and the pub was emptied. Involving religion, a major problem the Salem people faced was who should be the village minister. They argued over who was qualified enough at the time of the trials. They began to argue over the current minister, Samuel Paris. Along with the disputes over who should minister, families began to quarrel and have disputes over trivial issues. In the book Salem Possessed, Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissebaum points out Daniel Andrew and Philip English were accused shortly after defeating Thomas Putnam, the witch trials ringleader and the father of Ann Putnam, one of the girls afflicted during the trials, in an election for town selectmen. Another occasion Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissebaum brought out was a woman named Rebecca Nurse was accused shortly after her husband became a member of the village committee that was strongly against Minister Samuel Paris, whom the Putnams were supporters of. Though this theory appears valid, historians such as Elaine Breslaw in her book Tituba, the Reluctant Witch of Salem, acknowledges that other towns faced similar difficult times, but they never resulted to witch hunts and mass hysteria, by stating in her book, but other towns in frontier Massachusetts that experienced the same socioeconomic political difficulties did not spark a similar witch scare. There are many different theories involving the Salem hysteria. Some say the hysteria took place from pure boredom of the teenage girls due to life in Salem. The girls spent their days in the home with their mother, cooking and cleaning. They grew resentful and monotonous, which explains the interest that Betty Paris and Abigail Williams took with the fortune-telling and magical stories Tituba would share. One of the interesting theories introduced in 1976 by Linda Corporeal was the symptoms the afflicted girls were facing were a result of ergot poisoning. Ergot is a parasitic fungus that grew on the rye and grains in Salem. It contains a byproduct called ergotamine that is related to the hallucinogen LSD. When ergotamine is ingested, it has many cardiovascular and neurological effects like convulsions, vomiting, crawling sensations on the skin, hallucinations, gangrene, and etc. Later in 1976, an article was published that refuted Corporal's claims, arguing that the convulsive ergotism cause occurred in most settlements where locals suffered from vitamin A deficiency. An example of a modern-day witch hunt was the accusation of communist sympathizers by Republican Senator Joseph R. McCarthy. After World War II, America was afraid of the spread of communism, and Senator McCarthy used this to his advantage. February of 1950, McCarthy gave a speech at the Ohio County Women's Republican Club in Wheeling, West Virginia. As he waved a piece of paper around during his speech, he declared he had a list of 205 known members of the Communist Party who were in the State Department working and shaping policy. At the beginning of his second term as senator in 1953, McCarthy was put in charge of the Committee on Government Operations. This position allowed him to further launch expansive investigations on the alleged communist infiltration of the federal government. Congress passed the McCarran Internal Security Act, which allowed the United States to order the accused of being descendants to submit to government surveillance. Similar to the witch trials, out of fear of reprisal, many people made false confessions and accused friends, co-workers, and their enemies of being communists. Among the people violated and accused were well-known Hollywood stars like Waldo Salt, Lillian Hellman, Lena Horne, Paul Robeson, Arthur Miller, and many more. When these stars were accused, their passports were taken and many were blacklisted, leading to the end of their career. In allegory to the whole situation, Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible. As he refused to cooperate with Congress by providing names of communists, similar to Giles Corey resistance, he began to write the play which reenacts the Salem witch trials in comparison to the hysteria that resulted from McCarthyism. Although there are many different theories involving the Salem witch trials, the overall tragedy throughout all of them are innocent women and men are being incarcerated or hung for accusations that were solely based off of testimonies from neighbors. The triumph of this mass hysteria was the citizens of Salem followed their deep believing that the witches should be expelled using the Bible verse Exodus 22:18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," to justify their actions. But the damage was done, and age was not a cease. We see this in the case of 71-year-old Giles Corey, who pleaded not guilty to witchcraft. Giles was pressed to death with rocks as a punishment for his standing mute to answering any questions asked during his interrogation. Though the people in prison were pardoned of witchcraft charges by May 1693 and the names of the accused were restored, many died in jail and lost everything they had. Dedicated to the 300th anniversary of the trials, Nobel Weasel revealed the Witch Trials Memorial in Salem in memory of the innocent people that lost their lives during the hysteria. The memorial is still standing in memory of the innocent lives taken by the trials.